On this Saturday night, Lviv under fire. Fresh attacks on western Ukraine as the U.S. president wraps his trip in Poland.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
And Biden's offer of asylum to thousands who have fled the war. Searching for reconciliation.
The Catholic Church has to acknowledge what they did to our people.
We're in Rome with Canada's Indigenous delegation as they look for answers from the Vatican. Plus, filling feeds with pressure, the mental health risks men face from social media and how to avoid them without ditching the apps. And escaping Mariupol.
There is a constantly sound of the airplane, but you need to go outside anyways because you cannot survive without food.
The dangerous trek to leave their home city as it crumbles around them.
Global National, reporting tonight, Dallas Flexhog.
Thick black smoke filled the skies of Lviv today after powerful explosions were heard in the western Ukrainian city, once thought to be a safe haven for those fleeing the war. Good evening and thank you for joining us. One day after Moscow said it would focus its efforts on Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, rockets have hit the country's major western hub. The attacks come as U.S. President Joe Biden wraps up his trip in neighboring Poland. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, Jeff Semple begins our coverage tonight from Lviv.
This isn't exactly the honeymoon Yulia and Konstantin Hordorbin had imagined. The couple is setting up their new apartment in western Ukraine after escaping their home in the east. They're from the Donbass region, which has endured some of the worst of this war, and where pro-Russian separatists had already been fighting for years. This was supposed to be the couple's wedding day, but when Russia invaded last month, they decided to move up the date.
Unfortunately, I believe this war will not finish soon, so I don't want to wait anymore.
As the Russian army approached late last month, they went to City Hall and asked to be married immediately. But then air raid sirens sounded, and they all rushed into this basement bomb shelter. And it's here where the couple said, "I do." So you got married in a bomb shelter?
In a bomb shelter.
Very unusual place, but
yeah, nice park.
This is our story, and we'll tell our children.
Yeah, now I can understand.
When the sirens ended, they went back upstairs and took these wedding photos. No regrets, they say, though Yulia wishes she'd gotten to wear her wedding dress.
I was in UNICEF hoodie. Yeah. A nice dress was waiting for me in Kramatorsk.
They're now hoping to start their new lives here, in the relative safety of Lviv, far from the front lines. Russia said Friday it was focusing its mission on the Donbass region, on the other side of the country. But it didn't take long for that claim to prove false. Just one day after Russia announced it was refocusing its military campaign in eastern Ukraine, we just heard air raid sirens, an explosion, and are now seeing billowing smoke here in Lviv in western Ukraine. Lviv, a humanitarian hub 70 kilometers from Poland, was hit at least 4 times. Among the targets, a fuel storage facility. A nearby school was also damaged, and at least 5 people were hurt. The mayor's press conference providing those details was cut short by another air raid siren. Numerous Russian strikes were reported across the country Saturday, including in suburbs around the capital, Kyiv.
I don't think that any reasonable person right now would believe anything that a Russian official or army person would say.
Even if the eastern Donbass region is indeed Russia's new true target, it's clear that doesn't mean the rest of the country is safe. Jeff Semple, Global News, Lviv.
As the war in Ukraine enters its second month, U.S. President Joe Biden was in neighboring Poland, wrapping up his European trip. Today, he pledged to bring in more Ukrainian refugees before taking aim at Russia's president in a fiery speech to the nation. Jennifer Johnson has the latest.
Flanked by his secretaries of state and defense, U.S. President Joe Biden held a high-stakes meeting with Poland's president in Warsaw. Despite a conflict with Poland over supplying fighter jets to Ukraine, Biden urged unity in stopping Russia.
Vladimir Putin was counting on being able to divide NATO, but he hadn't been able to do it. We've all stayed together.
Poland, which borders Ukraine, is bearing the brunt of the refugee crisis. Over 2 million Ukrainians have fled to that country, mothers and millions of children whose lives are in limbo.
The longer this goes on, the more likely you get long-term issues, which we know. Long-term issues are mental health issues, they're development issues.
We're so big.
President Biden met with dozens of Ukrainians at a soccer stadium, pledging America will take in 100,000 refugees and calling Russian President Vladimir Putin a butcher for what he's done to the Ukrainian people.
Each one of those children said something to the effect, say a prayer for my dad, or my grandfather, or my brother. He's back there fighting.
The U.S. president ended his 4-day European tour with a speech meant for the world, warning Putin not to take his war outside Ukraine's borders.
Don't even think about moving on 1 single inch of NATO territory. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power.
Biden claims international sanctions are depleting the Russian economy and weakening the Russian military. But Ukraine's leaders say they can't wait for that to take an effect on Putin, as they ask every day for more military firepower to win this unprovoked war. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
A group of Indigenous people from across the country is making history with a journey to Vatican City for meetings with Pope Francis to talk about reconciliation. Our Neetu Garcha is in Rome and joins us now with more. Neetu, what do delegates plan to say to the Pope?
Dallas, when they meet with Pope Francis here at the Vatican next week, Indigenous delegates will be sharing first-hand accounts of the impact of the residential school system that forcibly removed tens of thousands of children from their homes, subjecting many of them to abuse, rape, and malnutrition in what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015 called a cultural genocide.
I hope the Pope realizes, in order to move forward together, the Catholic Church has to acknowledge what they did to our people, to our children.
Taylor Bain-Takosa is among 32 knowledge keepers, elders, residential school survivors, and youth on a flight to Rome this weekend. The delegation of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis members, all with unique histories, experiences, and messages, is set to touch down in Italy on Sunday, along with 6 Catholic bishops from across the country. The group will travel about half an hour by bus to a hotel ahead of the first of 4-hour-long private meetings with Pope Francis on Monday. This conference room is where regular media briefings will be held with delegates during the week. It will be an exhausting and emotional experience for members, some who say they will not be entering expecting a papal apology here, instead pushing for that to happen on Indigenous land in Canada. Bain-Takosa says without these conversations, no one can move forward, but it's important to acknowledge the many emotions this trip brings up for survivors, some who are struggling with the idea of it.
A lot of the feelings, come from people who are survivors, and some of them don't feel like that they need an apology or that this trip is worth anything to them, and I acknowledge those feelings.
The Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops is responsible for the estimated $350,000 cost of this delegation trip it organized using its operating funds, separate from its recently announced $30 million Indigenous Healing and Reconciliation Fund. The Catholic bishops say a papal visit to Canada is imminent, but no dates have been set, and there's been no firm commitment that the visit would include an apology. Delegates on their way here hope that will change after this trip. Dallas?
Neetu Garcha in Rome, thanks. And there is some support for survivors. A 24-hour crisis line is available. The number is toll-free. You can speak in confidence. That number is 1-800-721-0066. 2 heavyweights in the Conservative leadership race rallied supporters in 2 provinces that could be key in deciding who becomes the next leader of the official opposition. As David Akin reports, favorite Pierre Poilievre is getting some stiffer than expected competition from Patrick Brown and John Charest.
Thank you very much. At a rally just north of Toronto, Pierre Poilievre takes aim at his rivals.
How many working folks can't choose where to go for a vacation because they can't afford $1.75 a liter of gas, a price that's going to rise because of the carbon tax that Justin Trudeau has imposed and that Patrick Brown and Jean Charest support.
Poilievre, Patrick Brown, and Jean Charest are at the top right now of a Conservative leadership race already crowded with 9 hopefuls. Poilievre has the most support in the Conservative caucus, but Brown got a big boost last week when popular Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner said she would be Brown's national campaign co-chair. Brown also hopes to use the supporters list that helped him win the Ontario Progressive Conservative leadership in 2017 to win the federal leadership this fall. And on Friday, former Ontario Premier Mike Harris announced his support for Charest, who, of course, is a former Quebec Premier. Charest was campaigning Saturday in his old riding of Sherbrooke. The focus on Ontario and Quebec should surprise no one, because this race is decided on a points system, with each and every riding in the country having 100 points up for grabs. The electoral strength of the Conservative Party is in the 48 ridings in Alberta and Saskatchewan, where Conservatives hold just about every seat. But it is the points in the 189 ridings in Ontario and Quebec, where Conservatives hold less than 50 seats, that are crucial for any Conservative leadership campaign. Dallas.
David Akin in Ottawa tonight. Now, Pierre Poilievre labeled a new deal between Trudeau's Liberals and New Democrats a coalition power pact this week. It means the Liberals will prioritize policy issues favored by the NDP in exchange for the party's support. For more on that and whether the NDP could pay a price, Eric Sorensen spoke to NDP leader Jagmeet Singh on the West Block. Eric?
Dallas, one big question is, does the Liberal NDP deal to keep the government in office for up to 3 more years risk making the New Democrats indistinguishable from Liberals, or worse, invisible? The Liberals are shifting left to adopt NDP policies on drugs and dental care, but are New Democrats also shifting right? On the West Block, leader Jagmeet Singh said his party will support an increase in military spending, but stop short of endorsing the NATO spending target of 2% of GDP.
We believe that there should be, of course, increased support for the tools that they need, as well as staffing. We've seen a drop in personnel, and we ask our military to do lots of things, like going in to help during the pandemic in seniors' homes. So we know that they need help and support, and we're okay with that. We think that's the right thing to do, but we do not support the 2% of NATO.
Singh acknowledges that the party could pay a price electorally if the Liberals, as the governing party, can claim credit for NDP initiatives.
There may be risks, but there's also incredible opportunities. When we say to Canadians, why vote for New Democrats, they often see us fighting for them, but they don't see results. And people want to know, what's in it for me? What are you going to get me and my family? How are you going to make my life better? Now we can say with 25 MPs, we got people dental care.
Singh says he's optimistic Canadians will not forget New Democrats, but will reward them with more seats in the next election, an election he says he will absolutely be running in. Dallas?
Eric Sorensen in Ottawa. Thanks, Eric. The gaps in support for veterans. Coming up, a fatality inquiry in a murder-suicide exposes where the system failed a Canadian-Afghan war vet. A fatality inquiry in Nova Scotia has uncovered more issues surrounding domestic violence and treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder in military members. It stems from the murder-suicide of Lionel Desmond, his wife, mother, and daughter 5 years ago. Ross Lord reports.
Corporal Lionel Desmond put his life on the line for Canada, but testimony at a provincial fatality inquiry shows efforts to help him with his post-traumatic stress disorder fell short. Before testimony ended on March 22nd, the judge in charge of the inquiry, Warren Zimmer, made it clear there are gaps in policing and support systems.
Be more concerned with changes in the system that would help close those gaps so that things don't slip through.
Including sharing information more widely about police calls for domestic disputes even if they don't result in charges. Desmond and his wife Shayna had a troubled marriage after he left the military. There were no allegations of physical violence, but there were calls to police. The inquiry heard Nova Scotia police had few training courses on intimate partner violence because police consultants who left through attrition were not replaced.
His silence of Afghanistan and him not sharing, much about Afghanistan was enough to say that Afghanistan done a lot to that man.
Psychiatrists testified Desmond was preoccupied by thoughts that forced him to relive traumatic experiences he endured in Afghanistan in 2007. He had been released from an inpatient psychiatric facility less than 5 months earlier, seeing 6 Nova Scotia doctors in the following months. A crisis worker who interviewed Desmond and his wife together told the inquiry she now questions her own approach.
I wonder if I had have made sure to have time alone, if anything, if either of them would have disclosed anything differently. Or
it took Veterans Affairs Canada 6 months to appoint a case manager for Desmond, a delay witnesses blamed on budget cuts. Lawyers will make final submissions in April. A final report with recommendations is expected this fall. Ross Lord, Global News.
Ahead, the pressure of social media on men, how mental health issues intensify with every post. Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins has died at the age of 50. No cause of death has been revealed, and the band is asking for privacy for Hawkins' family at this time. The COVID-19 pandemic has seen Canadians spending more time on their phones than ever before. That involves scrolling through social media time and time again. As Jamie Morocker explains, it's a habit that can lead to some major mental health challenges.
Scrolling through social media may be a good distraction for Abdullah Barez, but it doesn't make him feel great about himself. With every photo, he says, comes pressure to be better, eat cleaner, and hit the gym harder.
It kind of gives you this unrealistic, ideal of what a man should be.
Though not officially diagnosed, Barez described his feelings of insecurity as body dysmorphia, a mental health condition resulting in an obsessive negative perception about one's body. Research shows in men, body image issues can be linked to anxiety, depression, and even suicidal thoughts or behavior. And experts say social media is making the problem worse.
A man might compare himself or his own body to what he's seeing on social media, which those images are incredibly unattainable, filtered, photoshopped, could be edited. So the ideal body type becomes increasingly unrealistic and exaggerated.
At the University of Toronto, Kyle Ganson is studying eating disorders, muscle-building behaviors, and body image. He says almost all of the people he has interviewed have referenced influencers or YouTubers as inspiration.
These sort of platforms influence their body image and the desires to change their bodies in specific ways.
Once you start following one bodybuilder or like a post about dieting, an app's algorithms can fill up a feed with more of the same. Marketing expert Jenna Drenton says these companies are aware and are implementing changes.
Certain hashtags are banned. However, consumers are incredibly savvy and find ways to create different hashtags.
The onus then falls largely onto creators to put out healthy, safe, and unedited content, and on consumers to educate themselves and filter who they follow. Perhaps easier said than done, when any type of suggested content can still make it onto one's homepage. Jamie Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
Next, escaping Mariupol, cut off from the world and scrounging for food. How a pair of sisters found their way to safety. Even if Russia pulls back on its goals in this war, one city it may still try to take is Mariupol. Holding the port city would give a land corridor between Crimea and the Donbass region. But despite constant shelling for the past month, only about half its residents have left. Mike Armstrong spoke with two sisters who have now reached safety.
Every day it was worse and worse.
They are two sisters sharing one story about leaving home.
We couldn't stay there.
This is what they left behind. Mariupol basically being reduced to rubble and cut off. Without phones or internet, twin sisters Anastasia and Hannah Rechkina didn't understand what was going on.
They thought that maybe if no one is safe, comes to save us, maybe the world just doesn't know about the situation. That's how we saw it.
Now, on the day of the invasion, the sisters say at first they didn't realize it was happening. Their city was fought over in 2014 when Russia-backed rebels took over parts of the Donbass region. In the 8 years since, it was close enough to the front lines they could sometimes hear fighting off in the distance. The explosions when the invasion started were closer.
and said, "Mom, Putin attacked Mariupol now." And then we realized that it's a real war. It's not what we used to in Mariupol.
What came next was weeks of scrounging and hunger. In the first days, they rationed the little they had, then they scavenged, searching friends' homes and apartments, people who'd left, looking for anything.
We were checking every shelf if they have something, and I was happy. Oh my God, I found the candle. Oh my God, I found rice, or I found something else.
The challenge after that was what to do with what they found. Without gas or electricity, everything had to be cooked over a fire, out in the open, exposed.
When you need to go outside to cook food, then there is shelling, you need to hide. There is a constantly sound of the airplane, but you need to go outside anyways because you cannot survive without food.
The sisters were able to escape. They're still in Ukraine, but at least safer. Their ride out of Mariupol was a stranger who agreed to take their group just somewhere.
I don't know where we going. I don't know how much time it will take. But I was happy that I'm in a car. We are all is with our family, and that's all I wanted.
Now there is one thing the sisters feel guilty about: locking the door to their apartment. There isn't much, but there is some food left. Food they say their neighbors likely need desperately. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Krakow, Poland.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Dallas Flexhog. Tonight, we leave you in Kelowna, BC, where members of the local Ukrainian community are rolling up their sleeves, preparing traditional Ukrainian treats. They're raising money for medical supplies and food to help families affected by the war. Thanks for watching. Take care.